Okay, everybody, we're back with another super special guest. Today we're joined by UFC flyweight. We have Miranda the Maverick. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, we'll just get right into it. If you just want to tell the people like where you're from, a little bit about your upbringing, things like that.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I'm Miranda Maverick, obviously. Right now, I'm based in Denver, Colorado. I train out at Easton Training Center in Denver and also pound for pound Muay Thai based in Littleton. So those are my two main gyms. I go to a couple others during the week too. So schedule's pretty busy with training. I train like 22 hours a week or so. On top of that, I also work full time for Hershey, the chocolate company. I'm actually a statistician for their media marketing team.
Mm.
Yeah, aside from that, I grew up in Missouri. So I'm from the Springfield, Missouri / Lake of the Ozarks area originally. Lived out in Virginia for a few years as well, out in Norfolk while I was doing grad school. So kind of have fan bases popped around everywhere. I teach seminars a lot too. So know a lot of people in a lot of places. And of course, the MMA world's pretty small. And I started martial arts, started jujitsu at the age of 16, almost 17, and started fighting the week after I turned 18, basically.
Oh,
Um, and turned pro the week before I turned 19. So
oh my
long
gosh.
road.
Wow. Yeah, you were like accelerated in your process there a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, which nowadays you can't really do that, like that was back when there still was not much talent in the female divisions. And so I was able to have a lot of fights very fast. I had 8 fights within a year. And yeah, turned pro very quickly, where I joked with my sister who also did some amateur fighting, and she was like, this girl was so good. And I was like, yeah, that girl was pro level and you're fighting her in your like fourth amateur fight. So
Wow.
the sport's really come a long ways with a lot of these girls, men and women, right? Starting at a much younger age, training with MMA gyms popping up everywhere. Where before it'd be like 3 hours before you'd find another jujitsu gym, and now it's like every single town has one.
Sure. Yeah. And then what just first got you into combat sports? Were you always kind of interested, or what like got you into training to begin with?
A lot of different aspects. I watched UFC since I was a little kid. My dad and my siblings and I all would wrestle on the living room floor and learn basics from watching UFC and from watching YouTubes. And we'd look up, like, we'd pause the TV and then we'd forward it really slow and learn how to do a rear naked choke or an arm bar or something like that. And we learned the actual details of it instead of just wrestling around nonsense, right? And so
Mm,
we learned a little bit. My dad always wanted us to learn self defense and be able to handle ourselves pretty well. We were all very strong growing up on a ranch.
mm,
And when I turned 16, I could finally drive myself. And I asked my dad if he'd be cool with me going to an actual gym to learn. And he was very encouraging of it. He was like, if you can find a way to pay for it, you do it. And I was like, all right, cool. And so I did. And I actually started at a gym that had a juvenile class because I was really worried about rolling with grown men, like it was kind of
sure.
uncomfortable. And even my dad was like, I don't know if you're going to like it or not. I don't know if I'm going to like it. And I was like, yeah. And it was one of those things where my dad like would come to my first couple classes, make sure the coaches were cool and stuff. But yeah, I rolled with some juvenile kids the first couple weeks, fell in love with jujitsu, and I was already beating up most of these kids, even teenagers, just after a couple weeks because I already knew basics,
Yeah.
and jumped right into Springfield Fight Club, which is where I actually turned pro with. I stayed with them for many years and I still go back and visit when I'm home.
Mm,
Um, and when I turned 18, I'd already been encouraged to try fighting. And I was like, no, I don't want punched in the face. And
mm,
as I got older and saw more and more fighters and more female MMA fights that were amateur, I was like, I could do that. I'll at least see how far I can go. And so
yeah.
decided to give it a try. And I told myself, if I win the first one, and I enjoy it. So like punch the girl in the face and don't say sorry the whole time, which is what I was afraid of. Then I'll go be the best I can be. And that's what I
Yeah.
did.
Oh, that's amazing. So it sounds like you had some really like strong support system early on. Were there any other influences outside of just like your family, like any other support in those
Uh,
early days?
Not really. I watched the UFC, like I said, so there were a lot of inspirations as far as learn from this person and that person. I watch YouTubes over every type of fighting, Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, um, MMA fights in general and the older UFCs, and watch all that stuff. But as far as actual like personal inspirations, it was mainly just my family. And then it got to the point where coaches at Springfield Fight Club were helpful as well.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's interesting. And
Yeah.
then so you make your first fight is pretty early on. And then how many amateur fights? I know you had a pretty successful amateur career, but before your UFC debut, what were some experiences early on for you?
Well, I was 7-1 as an amateur. Like I said, I turned pro before I turned 19. So I had all 8 of those fights within a year. And then Invicta, Shannon Knapp, the president of Invicta, actually messaged me on Facebook Messenger of all places and was like, "Hey, do you want to turn pro with our promotion?" And I was just elated. I was
Mm,
like, "Yes, please," you know. And so turned pro with them, stayed with Invicta for many years, trying to get to the UFC basically. Had a couple fights outside the promotion in between fights. And UFC offered me several different things throughout my career
mm.
that just weren't good offers. You know, it'd be like a 3-day notice and they'd give me a one fight offer. And I'm like, that
Oh,
just means they want you to go in there and get beat up. Right.
mhm.
And I had that happen like 3 times. And then they finally gave me a really good offer towards the beginning of when COVID happened. I would have been fighting on that Woodley card that got canceled, the first canceled card during COVID. That was
Mm.
supposed to be my UFC debut. And then they canceled the whole card and I was back to square one. And I
Wow.
was so upset. I was like, oh, I was so close. And
Mhm,
then in June, just about a month later, they called me and were like, "Hey, you want to be in the UFC again?" I was like, "Let's do it."
mm.
That's when I finally got my foothold into the UFC. And I think at the time I was 11-2.
Wow. Yeah, that's super impressive. And then that's funny just that I can't imagine being in your position, like you're waiting for the UFC call, and then you have to turn them down. Like, what was that like? Just did you get was that advice from other people, or is that just the wisdom from yourself?
All the above. I had a manager at the time. My dad was probably the biggest one who was like, wait, 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 because I didn't want to, but it was a smart thing that I did wait when I did. And I actually got to compete in the Invicta tournament, which was the thing that kind of got my name on the map, right? I fought 3 times in one night, beat everyone out of 8 girls in that tournament. And all 3 of those girls, fun fact, are the only 3 rematches I've ever had. So I
Wow.
had already fought Victoria Leonardo. I fought her in my first round of the tournament and beat her again. I had already fought and lost to Deanna Bennett, who I then fought in the finals of the tournament and beat her. Right.
Mm.
So that was a big thing. And then Shanna Young was my second round matchup that I beat. And I ended up fighting her later in the UFC. So just kind of crazy that all 3 of those girls are my only rematches I've ever had, and all 3 of them were.
Yeah, that's insane to have that many fights in one night. Like that's
Mhm.
unheard of these days, except for like maybe the Ultimate Fighter tournament, or that's not even in the same night.
No,
So
they aren't even in the same night. It's kind of
yeah.
crazy. Invicta's been one of the only ones to do that that's been full MMA,
Uh,
3 fights. So it was pretty insane, and it kind of put me on the calendar. You know, everybody knew who I was after that, or at least anyone who was a big MMA fan. And that's when the UFC really started taking interest. I was getting to the point where I was gonna have the UFC, or I'm sorry, the Invicta flyweight title shot.
mm,
And COVID kind of ruined all that because the title holder at the time was Brazilian and they could not bring her out.
right. Oh yeah, it screwed everything up. But so then you finally get to make your chance, your debut, a few years ago. Just what are your like emotions, your feelings like backstage before you make that walk? How are you feeling before that debut?
Excited. I don't think there was anything but pure excitement. Maybe there was a little bit of nervousness too, but that happens every single fight, right? Like you never get used to that, although it gets better over time. And I remember just telling myself, like, I have to go out there and just put the epitome of who I am out there, right? Like go in there, be as aggressive as I can and make a showcase of myself. And that's what I did. I went in there and got the doctor's stoppage in the first round. Really impressed. And ended up fighting Jillian Robertson next, who at the time was ranked number 15.
Yeah. Yeah, and then just from them till now, like how would you say like your training's evolved? I'm sure like the facilities you've had access to is advanced and stuff like that. But as far as your process, like what's that look like from the beginning till now? Like how's that
Yeah,
evolved?
honestly, I could go back to the same gyms I started at and still be improving. I think a lot of it has to do with who we are as athletes, but a lot of it has to do with coaches as well. I wouldn't say because I'm in the UFC, I'm in better facilities, but I have had a lot of different opportunities. And a lot of it was actually based on just where I was in life, right? I started at a young age. I was doing full time school, full time work, and full time training all at the same time from the age of 18 to last year. I finally got done with all my schooling, right?
Mm,
And so I was in Missouri at first. I moved out to Virginia for grad school and went to the best gym I could find out there. And I was the only MMA fighter in the gym. And that was
mm,
kind of crazy. Like there were a lot of Muay Thai people, a lot of Jiu-Jitsu people. And once I start, that's not true. I think there was one other guy who was an MMA fighter. And by the time I left, there were like 2 or 3 of us. But it was just kind of crazy, like being not only the only professional there, but the only MMA fighter in general. So
mm,
different perspective, learning different aspects of the sport, though. I got a lot better in my striking.
mm,
but not necessarily the putting it together. I was still working on that a lot. And when I moved out here to Denver, I think that's really when everything just kind of went together. And I moved out to Denver because I finally was in a position in life where I could choose wherever I wanted to go and train.
Mm,
And I decided here because of the coaches, because of the gyms, because of the training partners. And I love my coaches out here and I love everything about it. And I feel like I've been improving at a fast rate. Win or lose, like we can tell the difference between every single fight I take.
yeah. No, that's awesome. And then I like to ask different fighters, like, what is your take on sparring? Like, there's people that go full bore, Sean Strickland style, and then there's some that, maybe later in their career they just don't do it at all. Like, what's your approach to that?
I definitely think you should have a healthy amount of sparring, like 1 or 2 times a week of live sparring. But I don't necessarily think it needs to be hard sparring unless you're like getting ready for a fight once a week, maybe, and go with very controlled training partners. Like I
Mm,
can still go hard with someone, and neither of us should leave the room with a black eye or a broken nose, you know?
right.
And that's kind of how the rule is here. Like you don't throw anything that's not padded. If you want to throw elbows, you put elbow pads on, you still control them. Same way with knees. If you're up against the cage, which I like sparring in a cage so that you can get that realistic feel, then you be really careful. You don't rake them down the side of it on their face. You just be controlled. They're your training partner. They're there to make you better. But I think technical sparring is good, like keeping the same speed without the power.
Mm,
I'm wearing the puffies, so they're training gloves with a little bit more padding on them, but still like MMA glove size ish. And then having, a few hard sparrings, they're more simulation fight style leading up to the fight. But again, very controlled, very few. You don't want to be bruised up and beat up and feel like you've already been in a fight going into fight week.
yeah. No, I got you. And then I'd also like to ask just different perspective of like between rounds, like do you kind of prefer technical advice or is it more motivational driven, a little in between? What's going on, everybody? I hope you're enjoying the video so far. Make sure you smash that like button, comment, and subscribe, and let's get back into it.
Everybody's different. Everybody's different. But for me, I do not like encouragement. I like
Mhm.
technical, like, what do I need to go in there and change and fix? Now, obviously, somebody can say, hey, that was good. Keep doing that same thing. That you won that round. Like, that's not a problem. But if I come to the stool and they're just like, good job, Miranda, good
Yeah.
work. That's not what I want to hear. If it was good work, the fight would already be over, right?
Mhm.
That's how I see it. So I want somebody to be like, you need to keep this hand up. You need to be throwing this combination. Did you see that she was doing this and this? Like, look out for this thing. I like as much technical information as I can get into my mind, even if sometimes half of it goes through and I don't even hear it.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear that because I feel like I found a lot of people that like both, but just to have the technical is definitely because I feel like a lot of the motivation you should be able to, almost find within yourself. Like if you
Yeah.
pep
Yeah.
talk,
And
it's like,
my motivation is the technical, right? Like my coaches aren't the
yeah,
nice, fluffy coaches. They're the ones that like smack my face and are like, let's freaking go. So
yeah, yeah.
I like it. And if anybody watches my fights the last couple of years, like my coaches are very loud, very detailed. Like everything they tell me, you can hear from the audience, which is kind
Mhm.
of crazy. And I love that because I'm very coachable as a fighter. Like if they tell me to move my right hand, I'm moving my right hand unless I see something wrong with it.
Yeah. Okay. And then let's just fast forward a little to your very last fight. You get the armbar finish. Um, how did you feel about that? Was that the game plan, or was that like how did you feel it went compared to, your expectations?
But the game plan was honestly spot on. We knew I was going to be able to take her down. Honestly, I wasn't um, I was prepared for everything she threw at me, but I was expecting a little bit more stand up than what we ended up doing. But taking her down ended up being the best move. We wanted to go in there cautious and safe. There was some dirty stuff that we knew she might try. So I was just trying to be safe and controlled and honestly beat her up until she had no fight left. That was the whole point of the thing. It's like, don't submit her in the first round. If you have the chance and it's right there, go for it. But if it's risky, wait, because she has power, and I don't want to be caught on bottom at all. I want to stay on top. I want to beat her up to the point she wants out of that fight. She's looking for a way out. And that's what we did. Wait until round 3 to where it was just, flailing to get out from underneath me and just caught the armbar.
Yeah, no, that was beautiful. And then just like looking forward, I know you're ready to get back in there. I saw you made a post. Was that like, did you guys come together to make that post? Was that just like a purely like a call out on your end, or How'd
Nope,
that
that
go?
was a come together kind of thing. We both
Oh,
have each
okay.
other's phone numbers. We've trained together before. We're not like best friends, but we're also
Mm,
not enemies of any sort. It's a small world out there. So a lot of us have trained with each other, are kind of friends with each other. And I
mm,
just messaged her and I was like, hey, like looking at people that have no fight scheduled. I don't think you have one. Would you be willing to fight me in the next few months? And she was like, yeah, I looked for one for December, January. I'm trying to get one. I was like, I'm trying to get one too. And I was like, let's both make a post. Let's message Mick. And so we both messaged our management and our matchmaker and basically waiting by the phone at this point. I really hope it ends up happening sooner rather than later because I get sick of waiting around just as much as everyone else does. And I
mm,
think a lot of fans and fan base don't understand that we don't get to choose when we fight, right?
mm.
Like if I could choose when I fought, I'd be fighting every 2 months. Like I'd be just raking in the money, fighting as many times as I can if I'm healthy. But instead, we have to sit there and wait for the phone to ring. And sometimes it's once every 6 months, which really stinks. But if that's the case, we're kind of at their will. It's not like we can go fight wherever we want, whenever we want.
Yeah, that was my next question. Like the process is just waiting around. Like how, like you probably try not to bother them, but you also want to, let them know
Yeah,
you're.
you want to hound them a little bit, but at that
Yeah.
balance where you're not annoying. The higher you get up in the rankings, of course, you have like a little bit more leverage with who you fight, maybe when you fight. But the amount of times you fight in a year doesn't seem to be due to any one person. Sometimes people get lucky enough freaking 5 fights in a year, which is crazy. And that's why I try to stay ready for short notices. Like I try to be ready all the time to where if they even have somebody drop out, they think Miranda will take this and
Mm,
and that's what I've been trying to do. I've taken all but one short notice they've ever offered me, and the only one I didn't take is when I was laying sick in bed. So that
uh,
would have been a little rough.
yeah, no, that's perfectly understandable. And then just if that were to be the fight with Andrea, like how do you see that going? What's that matchup look like in your mind?
I've trained with Andrea before. We both kind of know what to expect. She has really good taekwondo. She has good volume, and I plan on kind of, exposing ground game a little bit, but also showing her that my technique has grown a lot in the striking game. I think I'd be just as fast, if not faster, and have a lot more power in my hands.
Yeah. And then is there anybody else you would have your eye on at this
And
point?
anybody they'd offer me at this point, to be honest. But
Yeah.
I hope it's Andrea. I think that's a good kind of step for me instead of just kind of waiting for whoever has a short notice available. I'm right there on like the bridge of the rankings, and it's so frustrating
Mhm.
not being
Yeah.
back there.
Oh yeah, I bet. Now just looking at like your record, it's like you have, just a handful of losses and they're all decisions though. You've never been stopped. What would you attribute that to? Is that just kind of how the fight goes? Is that, something you
And
like?
obviously, I train never to get finished, like
Right.
I do jujitsu constantly. Like we're always putting ourselves in tough positions to where we have to get out within a few seconds, or we're on bottom and we have to work on getting out. Like I'll grind through anything. It does stink to lose, especially if it's just because of pace. I think the only true loss I've had, and by that I don't mean that the others weren't actual losses, but I mean like I lost every round. I didn't have an injury or anything like that. Was the Erin Blanchfield fight, and I
Mm,
went in there kind of underestimating her, to be honest. But I hope one day I can get that back. But she's gotten really far up there. She's improved a lot. Kudos to Erin. She's done a great job. All the other fights, like the Macy Barber fight, I still don't see that as a loss. That was kind of some
mm,
nonsense with the judges. Then there was the Jasmine fight, and honestly, that one was I had eye problems, which I shared on a post about. Like I literally went blind in one of my eyes in the second round, and I just fought through it and tried to finish the fight. Right. I think she did a great job. She kept her composure, and I did not keep mine. And I just made a very tragic mistake
mm,
and lost the fight. But losses happen, and I have never really felt in danger of being finished in a fight, though. I've never been in enough trouble to where I was like, oh my goodness, I might lose this fight being
yeah.
it's always like, okay, let's just get out of this round. You can make it, right?
Yeah. No, I'm sure that could be frustrating, like you said, if it's just a pace thing and you don't, get quite as many opportunities as you want. But you kind of led into it a little bit. The segue there. If you could have one of those fights back, which one would it be? Would it be Aaron or I know you
Oh
said
no,
Macy?
Macy Barber, I would beat Macy's butt, but I've
Yeah.
asked for rematches multiple times, even when there's been a chance for me to step in short notice, and she said no. So
Oh, she shut it down. Uh-oh.
I don't know if she shut it down or the
Okay.
matchmaker shut it down.
Oh, okay, I
One
got
or
you.
the other shut it down, which makes sense. They didn't want me going in there and ruining Stargirl. So
I got you. Okay. And then just like I see, outside of the cage stuff, you did like the break with the UFC cards, and then you did seminars. Like, what do you like? What inspires you to do that stuff? Is it more like business end? Is it just getting yourself out there?
All of it. I'm
Yeah.
a big business person. Like anything I can do to boom business or get exposure, I try to do. The UFC cards, honestly, was it all started with my dad seeing that I had a card out there. I don't know how he even found it. I don't know if someone messaged him or he just was looking up my name on Google. He'll do that
Mhm.
sometimes. And he was like, "Did you know you have collector cards out there?" And I was like,
Oh,
no, what are you talking about? I've had people send me cards, but they were like homemade things, and he was like, yeah,
um,
look at this, and like sends me screenshots. And amusingly, like 2 days later, I start getting like fan messages. They're like, can I send you my card and get it signed? Or have you ever looked into your cards? Or blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't know anything about this stuff.
yeah.
And Justin Yeager actually messaged me and was like, would you want to be on a break? And I was like, I don't even know what that word means, but sure. And
Yeah.
so he explained it to me, and I decided to be on it, and everyone was so supportive and everything that I was like, wow, like this is a whole nother fan group I didn't even know existed, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. And I was like, this is crazy. And everybody's so positive and like no haters on there really, like some are goofy with their comments, but there's no like, get off of here, like
Yeah.
you're effing this. Like there's nothing like you see on like Twitter and Instagram and typical fan bases, right?
Mhm.
So I found that pretty inspiring. And then on top of that, with the whole human trafficking thing coming up, I'm a huge advocate for supporting, survivors of human trafficking. So started doing auctions for that. And the UFC card group like really stepped up and participated. And I had people reaching out to me to say they wanted to share, they wanted to help in some way. And so that's kind of how I got involved in that. I've been teaching seminars since basically I started in the UFC, and I just love sharing my knowledge of the sport. Honestly, like I love inspiring the children, the women when I get to teach self-defense seminars. That's awesome to do and just be part of the community, share my knowledge and be a positive role model in this sport, right? Do some good instead of just going out there and doing things selfishly, which obviously I still get paid doing the seminars and stuff, but at the end of the day, I could do other things to get paid that much too, right? I'd rather like help out where I can. And yeah, that's kind of the end of it. I try to be business wise, but also be a good role model and help where I can.
Yeah. And then how do you feel like coaching, like, does that improve your own game? Do you feel like that helps you like saying things out loud, or maybe if they have questions that you might not even know?
Yeah, I think coaching is honestly a huge step in being a better martial artist. Nowadays, I think I'm just a good coach. I honestly feel that way. I'm not trying to brag, but I pay attention to a lot of detail. The coaches I've always liked were always found to be a good coach for me, were the ones who explain in a lot of detail. And I'm big about asking the silly little questions, right? Like, okay, I saw that, but what do I do with my left hand during that? Like where do the little pieces go? And I think all of that came from teaching kids class when I was a little bit younger. So when I was 18, 19, starting in the sport, I taught kids or helped with kids class. And man, you don't understand that when you tell a kid to do something, if you miss one little bitty detail, they do it all wrong, right?
Mhm.
You're like, wow, how can I explain this better? And so I joke with my adults, especially in my self-defense class. I use goofy analogies, very childish ones. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, make them into the shape of a banana or pretend like your arm's a sword, like I do all these things. I'm like, well, that's just from teaching kids class, but the adults remember that stuff too, right?
Yeah.
So I think knowing those details, knowing how to explain it makes it to where every time I do a move, I analyze it down to the exact details, and it
Mhm.
helps me with my own jujitsu and my own striking and my own MMA in general.
Yeah, and that seems to come full circle. That makes more sense. The technical stuff, and then going back to your corner advice, you're just all about the technical all
Yep.
around, which is important, of course.
Yep.
But then just outside of doing that other stuff that's like seminar related or what have you, like what are your other just hobbies and interests just in life?
Man, I don't have time for any hobbies or other
Yeah.
interests, honestly. Like I said, I work a full-time job and I do the fighting and I'm full pretty much all day. And anytime I get a chance to rest, excuse me, anytime I get a chance to take a break, I literally do just rest. Like I'll sit and watch a TV show or I'll draw. That I guess is my hobby, right? Like I do
Right.
it for my mental health, I do it for my free time to rest, and I also do it for business, right? And I
Mhm.
sell my pencil sketches and stuff, but I actually do my own drawings. I've had my own pencil sketching business since I was 11 years old, so I've been doing that on the side barely, and then during college I didn't do it at all. Like I basically just put it to the side and said, this is not the important venture I need to pursue right now, right? I'm too
Mhm.
busy. And the last couple of years since school has stopped, I've been able to kind of jump back into it and slowly get back. So if anybody wants any drawings done, hit me up. I'll be happy to share some of my stuff. But I do
Yeah.
that, and then yeah, I go on hikes when I can. I mean, we're out here in beautiful Denver, Colorado, and everybody's like, "Did you go do this? Did you go do that?" And I'm like, "I barely have time to do anything," and I'm such a
Mhm.
chicken about everything because it's like if I sprain my finger, I'm out of a fight, and that means I'm out of an income, right? So
Yeah.
very careful when I go do things, but I enjoy going hiking, just going outdoors in general, spending time with my family, of course, going back to the farm in Missouri when I can, and
Yeah.
drawing.
Yeah. No, and then I saw recently you just celebrated your 1 year anniversary being married. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You guys do anything special for like for the anniversary or
Nothing.
okay, you're just too busy. I
In
understand.
fact we both kind of forgot. So what's funny is, we have so many anniversaries, I guess, that we celebrate where we're not big about like the sentimental days and all that. But
Yeah.
we have our elopement anniversary, which I guess is what we really consider our anniversary.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's what so that's coming up. That's Thanksgiving, or not technically Thanksgiving, but November 25th. And then October 1st is when we got married in front of friends and family and stuff. So that's more of our public anniversary, I guess you'd say. But
Yeah.
didn't do anything special. I think we more see our own anniversary is when we first met and had our first date, because that's when we got to know each other and like became official. So
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful though.
thanks.
But yeah, and then just what advice would you give to like young women or men just coming up that want to be fighters? Like any advice for them in like the early phases of it?
So many things. I've met several people that don't have social media that want to be a fighter, and they're like, "Oh, I'm just starting out. Am I too young or old?" And I'm like, "Listen, you need to get on the social media train, right? It's huge for business. It's huge for advertising, for sponsors, for getting out there and making money at the early stages of MMA, right? I was one of those people that grew up where social media is bad. I still think it's a horrible thing, but it can also be a very useful thing, right? And it can work to your advantage while also being a good person. You don't have to go along with the crowd. You can do whatever persona you want, but start advertising for yourself, invest in yourself, right? Is how everybody else phrases it. So start social media, find a good training camp that really supports you. If you're going to a gym where for years they've just been like, you just need to get tougher, that's probably not the place to be, right? That's where a lot of sparring comes in, where everybody's just trying to fight each other. And if you get knocked out or whatever, they're just like, you just need to get tougher. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I've been doing this for like 10 years. I think the toughness happened a few years back, and now I just need to learn how to improve. I'll work on getting tough in the cage. Uh,
Mm,
so have a strong support system, whether that means you need to get out of where you are, or whether it means you just need to find specific people to train with. Be your own advocate. Stand up for what you need to. Don't let people manipulate you into feeling bad about picking different partners or whatever else. Work on social media and be smart about the fights you take. You don't have to take every hard fight at the very beginning just to prove how tough you are. Like play it smart, because UFC doesn't care if you fought hard people. They care about wins and losses.
yeah. I was about to say, look at you. I mean, you had to turn down UFC a few times. People that have that dream probably never imagine that, even
Yeah.
coming. So
And it's hard, right? It's hard to, but you have to think about the long run. It's like, do I want one fight in the UFC and then them never hear of me again? Like, no, I don't want that. So let me just keep doing my thing, even if it means less money for a little while, and wait
mm,
until the right opportunity knocks. Basically, bet on yourself, right? Always bet on yourself and work hard enough that that's the smart choice.
yeah, I think that's some great wise advice for everybody out there starting up. But and then just before you go, like this might be a little weird because you're still in it, but like do you have a Mount Rushmore of UFC or MMA, like a top four guys or girls?
Uh, I don't know, not too much. GSP's up there, 100%. He's the main face of it all.
Cool.
And Ronda Rousey, I don't necessarily like her as a person as much as some people do, but I think she really was like a huge landmark for the sport, especially in female MMA, like a pioneer of it,
Mhm.
um, entirely, right? So many. But honestly, like I grew up watching more of the men than the women, as silly as that sounds. And so many of the women are now my current rivals that it's hard to say.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I'm just going to keep it at GSP and Ronda for now.
that's
I
fair.
think the whole GOAT thing changes every single day because this sport is evolving so much. But I look at people as who they are as people, not so much as fighters. And I watch so many fights and so many techniques. It's hard to say who I think the GOAT is or who is the Mount Rushmore. I think Anderson Silva is amazing to watch, but I also don't do hardly any of his techniques because I'm not built like him. I don't have the speed like him. And I
Right.
definitely don't have that head movement.
Yeah, he's wild. But yeah, then it's hard to choose like favorite between greatest and it's
Yeah, yeah.
subjective. But I didn't know if you'd have a take on that. But yeah, I think that's all I have for you. But thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. Can't wait to watch your journey. Hopefully you get something in
Yeah,
December as soon as
hopefully.
you can.
Man, I hope so. I hope so. Keep a lookout. I'll be posting as soon as I can if I get anything.
Okay, everybody, that was UFC flyweight Miranda Fear the Maverick. I hope you enjoyed the video.